Hi, thanks for joining us and welcome to Common Ground in Conversation. We're going to tell you a little bit about a piece of work that myself and my friend and collaborator Joe Peel have done as part of the Festival of the Mind. So I'm Professor Duncan Cameron. I'm an environmental microbiologist and I'm the co-director of the Institute for Sustainable Food at the University of Sheffield. My research really tries to understand how we produce our food, what the environmental risks and damages of producing our food look like, but critically what solutions to making our food supply more sustainable and more secure could look like. And I've been working with Joe, we've known each other for a number of years, and we've come together to do this project.
And I'm Joe Peel. I'm an artist also based in Sheffield. I'm probably best known for my mural work, which is outdoors, a lot of that around the city. I've been working as an artist for like over 15 years now, and I work all over the world, and I do create other pieces of work that aren't just murals. I do canvas works and sculptural pieces, which is what we've come to Festival of the Mind today.
So I think, over the next half an hour or so, Joe and I are going to have a bit of a chat and tell you the story of how we created Common Ground and why we created Common Ground and what we think its impacts might be, and hope that you will come and join us and come and see the installation at Sydney and Matilda, the gallery that's hosting the Protopia exhibition. So I guess maybe it's worth explaining how we actually know each other. Do you want to kick off?
Well, we met in Tasmania, in Australia, at the Mona Festival over there. I was invited out to paint a mural in the festival. It was like an arts festival, and they had this huge backstage venue and loads of performances and all sorts going on. And Duncan was also invited to Tasmania at the same time. And we ended up staying with the same people.
Yeah, we didn't know each other, even though we both live in Sheffield. But two mutual friends of ours, an artist and a science professor, moved to Tasmania, and I was invited to go and give a lecture there about my research. And as I say, Joe was there, and we just happened to go to this contemporary arts festival called Mona, which it's quite like the Festival of the Mind, really.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's a lot of collaborations, and there's music, art. Was there science there?
There was. We saw, what is it called, Vocal Womb, where there was the medical professor and the opera singer kind of filming vocal cords, which was mental.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool festival. There's a lot, a lot going on, and good weekend.
and it kind of got us thinking, because we were talking about, I'd seen Joe's work, but I didn't know it was Joe that did it. And we're kind of, I was admiring your work, and we were talking about my work. And, we thought, hang on, there's a real opportunity for us to do something together, to not just explain my work, but to explore it together. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think because, in our conversations in the pub around the time of the festival, we started talking about your work and my, and it was like the sudden realization that art and science are quite linked together, and that you are allowed to talk about each other's practices, I suppose. It's quite, especially when you're sort of growing up and learning about what you do, you get funneled into this system, which is very much like you're an artist, you're a scientist, but I think it can be really interesting when two different sort of thought, two different minds come together, basically, from different places.
I think you're bang on, and, we were the same people 200 years ago, the Renaissance scientists were artists, artists were scientists, Mary Shelley did science and wrote books, and that was normal. But I think you're right, I was always frightened as an academic, as a scientist, to think that I could comment on a creative work. And it was really working with you and Anthony Bennett, who's another artist that I've worked with on projects at the festival. You both kind of almost gave me permission. Is that, I don't know if that's the right thing to say,
yeah,
but
I think so.
It felt like that.
I think I felt like it was the same, permission as well, to sort of think about science and actually like react to research and have an opinion. You know, we'd have big chats in the pub, and it was really exciting to be like, oh, we're having a chat. Like, I thought that you just knew so much more that I couldn't have an opinion on this. And suddenly you're like, no, you are allowed an opinion. It's like, just because you know more doesn't mean that I know nothing about it. Or don't.
Exactly. And
so.
because I can't create what you can create, it doesn't mean I don't have in my mind's eye an aesthetic. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about working with you, is that we kind of empowered each other to have opinions and go, I think this would work, and it to be, you know, I think for me, sci-art is a difficult thing because a lot of it can be just like a literal representation of the science, and that doesn't mean anything to me, because, you know, we can do something very literal, but there's so much more behind science than what it is, and the processes. And I don't know if you agree, we kind of tried to capture that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think when you see the artwork, you'll see that I think we have kind of captured the creative process and reflected that science is a really creative business in itself. So we keep talking about the artwork, of course, and we've only given you a very sneak preview on the website, essentially to lure you down to Sydney Matilda. But it's probably fair if we say something about what we've created, the imagery around it, and you know, some of the key themes that we explored. So do you want to?
So it all began, I guess, when we started talking about the Tinsley farm that you're working on and the hydroponic growing systems down there, and it was really interesting to see small-scale production of food, I suppose, like looking at how food can be grown in essentially drain pipes. Was what I saw, you know, like the hydroponic system of these drain pipe systems that are being run to produce huge quantities of food in environments where food could not normally be grown. And so my work is often looks at the sort of parts of buildings that are often seen as waste, or like, you know, so drain pipes are a heavy feature in what I do, and so I really like the idea of these plants growing out of the drain pipes coming off of this house that I built, which was like a small sort of Wendy house sized building with these so drain pipes with plants growing out of them, and next to this house is a fridge, and in the fridge is a punnet of blueberries, and the blueberries will gradually rot throughout the festival, because I think something that really made me and Duncan connect was like when I started talking about this thing that I've always had of, like, you can tell a busy sort of middle class fridge basically always has this punnet of blueberries just like rotting at the back, and it's like something that I think a lot of people could relate to, like buying, you know, fruit pre-packaged in plastic from Chile and putting it in the fridge for later, and like, you know, it's like the superfood, the health food, so you're like in a rush, you're going to grab a handful of blueberries, but then, you know, they rot, and there's a lot of guilt connected to that, I think.
And I think what was really exciting for me was the kind of capturing that notion of recycling and upcycling as part of the scientific process that we went through. So the hydroponic farm that Joe's been talking about, we built in Tinsley. It was a community project working with local people that were food insecure, and understanding what the barriers were to fresh fruit and vegetables, how to cook them, how to grow them, and building a community centre around food and growing food. And it was a really exciting project, and it kind of stemmed from a bit of work that really we talked about at the start of it, which was the work that we'd done in Jordan with the refugees. So a really good friend of mine, Professor Tony Ryan, was asked by his friend, who is a dress designer, Helen Story at the London University of the Arts, to go to the refugee camp. They've been asked by the UN to go and understand what the problems look like and how to fix them. Tony found this pile of mattresses, and our research before that had been trying to develop synthetic soils, so growing plants without soil, we're running out of soil. We've all seen in the agricultural landscape our soils are not in particularly good shape. So we were trying to imagine how we might grow food in the UK without using soil. And one of the solutions looked a bit like foam from a mattress. So when Tony saw this pile of mattresses, I've never had a more exciting text messages from him. I'm not going to repeat the expletives of how excited he was. And he said, can we grow stuff in this? And I was like, yeah, we can. So we went over to the refugee camp and we looked at what was there because we couldn't afford to buy anything. And it was full of drain pipes. And we started building hydroponic systems out of drain pipes. And actually a lot of it, you can see that in the sculpture, can't you?
Yeah.
And even kind of the structure of the installation, it kind of harks back to some of the imagery from Zatchery.
Yeah, and then inside the house we made a film that was quite an interesting film to make because we were always planning to make a film as part of what we were doing, weren't we? And because we wanted to involve the research with the artwork to really sort of make a whole piece of work rather than just an artwork. We wanted to have people talking about the research and talking about their sort of links to food insecurity and how we could change things. And I guess like what was super interesting for us, like again it was like that, like, oh my god, like bad things happen, but this is kind of exciting because as soon as lockdown happened, like the whole film changed.
Yeah.
And the whole project changed because like everything that we were talking about in the project prior to lockdown like happened. Like everyone suddenly was in the same boat in terms of food insecurity, and people were in their houses and they're thinking about sustainability and they're thinking about how they consume food and growing it. Like everyone's like ideas about growing their own food had completely changed. And so Inside the House is a film about there's 9 people that we interviewed, well, including
us.
the 2 of us as well, because it is a bit self-referential because like I think the reason we called this project Common Ground was because this is a project that is about it's about the ground and it's about the commonalities that we all share in terms of like we all need food, and it doesn't matter where you're from, how well off you are, it's not about like demonizing people for what they've done wrong. It's about being in the same boat and understanding our sort of our own failures, I suppose. And so we wanted to put ourselves in the film so that we could expose ourselves as much as we're exposing our friends and the other people in the film, because it's not really about failure. It's about common ground, isn't it?
And I think what struck me about COVID was that it really put us all on common ground, didn't it? And the kind of metaphors in the work became so much more powerful when everybody was food insecure. And I realised how privileged I was because I'd never worried about where my food came from, and I actually then started feeling very guilty that I hadn't reflected on that, but at the same time I then started to understand what the challenges for a lot of people are around getting their food. So I think it was quite an enlightening moment. And again, we reference that all in it together notion in the work.
And I think particularly, like you say, you've never felt food insecurity before, but your whole work is about food insecurity. Yeah. And so like both of us, I guess, think about all of what might happen, and so we're very aware of like how things are going, but like it's never been a reality before. And so it's like really interesting to see how quickly things can turn from food security to food insecurity. And I think that's the same for people who sort of are going about their daily lives, and you can look at people and say, like, put them into groups of people who have and have not, but you can fall down that scale so quickly, and it's like it changes everything. As soon as you don't have access to clean water, to food, like your life is it's pretty important.
And then suddenly getting food becomes the kind of objective of everything, doesn't it? And making sure I live with my family, my mum and dad are getting on a bit, and they moved in with me a couple of years ago, which is awesome. It's great having you know, my mum and dad. And
Yeah.
it's a really fun environment to live in. But suddenly I felt so responsible because they were older, they had to stay in the house, they were essentially shielding. So me and my brother, who also lives in Sheffield, we had to we had to get the food, and we had to worry about making sure we had enough food and where it would come from. And that you know, that reality, I think, was really important. We wanted to capture that, didn't we, in the film?
I think, yeah, it was nice. So the film is, 9 people interviewed during lockdown talking about ideas of food insecurity, growing your own food, and then the film's been put into like a Zoom format that everyone will have become quite familiar with as well during lockdown. We weren't actually in one big Zoom conversation and filmed people individually, but that's put inside the house as well. So it's like wanted to feel a bit like that cramped feeling, because I guess like a lot of people did feel quite hemmed in, and when it was interesting, like just you talking then, it was like the food security thing. Like a lot of people have been sort of joking, you know, putting a lot of weight, eating a lot more, and like it was just in the forefront of people's minds. And even though like people could still access food, it was just thinking about it suddenly makes you, like, I guess, eat more of it.
And you could get, it's quite palpable how anxious people were around food, and how that connection to food was helping people get through lockdown, even though it was the thing that they were struggling to get. It was almost internally contradictory, and you could see why that could be a source of stress and distress. And you know, like you say, and I think. Until we talked about it, I hadn't really thought about the disconnection between the fact that I work on the food system and trying to understand what might go wrong with it, but had never experienced it myself. You know, I think it showed that our food system really is quite broken. We know that a huge proportion of all of the greenhouse gases that are produced by humans come from agriculture, from making food, and that we know that system, we kind of trust that it will be really resilient, and if there's a shock then we could deal with it. But you know, the pandemic and the very early days of the pandemic was not a massive shock to the food system, yet within hours almost we couldn't get enough food to the right place. And it wasn't that we didn't have enough food, we just didn't have it in the right place, and we didn't understand how to get it to the right place. So you know, suddenly a system that we thought we understood broke down, and we didn't understand why.
Well, that's it. And we're so used to just being able to, like, I don't know, for me, I'm like, I go to Osborne, it's like a real close supermarket, and I suddenly realised that most of the food that I buy, you know, like a lot of the stuff I get is from China, and or like further afield, and it's like those air miles and like where your food's from. And suddenly when borders are closing, if you actually look to just buy British food, like you're quite restricted. And it's not, you know, because I think like I get veg box, do all the look at a lot of local food, but I like chili sauce. I like, you know, like these condiments that are just like super important for me for flavouring food, that I just source from all over the world. And I've got a big thing for Japanese rice as well. So I
but I think
sacks with that, like, yeah. And so it's like suddenly you're aware of like how, even though you try and eat seasonally, there's these additions that you don't.
And I think that's it, isn't it? That, you know, over our lifetime, our relationship in the UK with food has really changed. When I was a kid, we did eat seasonally, and you know, you'd have stews and stuff like that in the winter, and then you'd have salads and quiches and things like that in the summer, and then there was a grey bit in between. But you know, I never expected to have strawberries in the winter. You know, that was a summer thing, that was a summer treat. And I think over the last, I guess, 40 years of my life, I've really seen that change. We now expect to get food all of the time, and I think this eating season is really interesting. But it kind of it contrasts against eating locally, because we know that, you know, eating seasonally and eating locally is essentially a really good environmental thing to do. But if we want to have tomatoes in the winter, buying them from the UK is a disastrous thing to do, because even though there's lots of food miles associated with them, the amount of carbon that is burnt to heat a greenhouse in the depth of winter in the UK means that actually it's probably more environmentally friendly to fly them from South America. And that really shocked me when we started working on those kind of problems and thinking, well, what will happen? And we've got another shock looming, Brexit.
Yeah.
And I think we saw how fragile the food system was under COVID, and I fear that we haven't learnt enough from it. I hope we don't go back to the days of panic buying.
Yeah, hopefully not. And I think, we had an interesting discussion, didn't we, at some point during the end of all this, like when we were allowed to meet in a garden, and we were talking about food supply chains sort of really running out because of these panic buys, and also agriculture sort of stopping, and the lack of workers and people actually making the food that we need. So those chains, you sort of assume that they'll exist, but when you do see panic buying and the shelves are empty, you suddenly realise how quickly food can disappear. How many of us there are, basically.
Exactly.
It's like, and we need a lot of food. As people.
But I think for me, one of the most important things about the work that we've done, though, is to reflect on solutions, and that's something you really picked up on, and that I really enjoyed taking from the piece that you created, was that there are all these problems, but we've got solutions, and some of those solutions are urban agriculture, growing our own food. We had a paper that we used as a reference recently in the journal Nature Food. It was led by my friend Jill Edmondson, that looked at Sheffield as a model city, and worked out that we could pretty much, if we used all of our green space and flat roofs to grow food, we could be almost self-sufficient as a city for fresh fruit and vegetables, which is pretty awesome. It's a bit of a pipe dream, but some of the solutions are out there.
And that was, I guess, with Common Ground, the whole point for us was that we wanted everyone to realise that if you do make these small changes, and that if everyone is on common ground in wanting to change it, we can change it. And it's not like, it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of sort of, there's bigger things happening, and it's going to restrict things. But like, if we can work out how to change our perception of what is happening, what we need, then we can be okay, and we can sustain ourselves through what might happen next of all the.
I guess that leads on, because we did have a lot of conversations about motivations for why we wanted to work with each other, and I guess I'd be interested to have a bit of a chat about what you wanted to get out of working with a scientist. And I certainly have some views about why I think working with artists is so important as a scientist. Yeah,
I think for my work, I've just been working, as an artist, you're quite a solitary creature a lot of the time, and I work in the urban environment, and of the urban environment, I'm looking very much at how we affect our environment, basically, as people. But I leave people out, and it's all to do with the buildings. And what I started noticing, the nature taking back over, and the fragility of humans in their environment. And so for the last Festival of the Mind, I worked with Nigel Dunnett, who I've worked with quite a few times before as well, and that was just such a brilliant collaboration, working with someone who just knew so much more than me, and made it accessible for me again. It's like each time I've worked with a scientist, it's like you're allowed to come into this territory, you're allowed to sort of think about it, and he made it possible for me to think about creating a green wall with an artwork, and to be like, you are allowed to think about plants. I think prior to working with Nigel, I literally was just like, I'm not a natural grower. I don't grow plant. I've tried in the garden, and it's not my thing. But I just think I also see the benefit of it, and I think if I can, make the planters for other people to grow in, or just inspire that sort of that group mentality. I think if I knew what my role was within it, then I'll help out. But working with science, it just feels like that's what I can do, because I'm not good at growing plants, but I'm good at working with people who are, and that's.
And you took that message to Chelsea,
which
was pretty epic.
So we did, Chelsea Flower Show, and the one in the centre of Sheffield, where we've created a green wall on a bus lane, so to take the pollution out of the air, basically, using plants, and realising that you can just put planting into a scheme, and it very much links with your work, which was so amazing when we spoke, and it's like the same thing happened. Nigel, you just start talking and realise that you're completely on the same page in terms of, like, how do we get these tiny little areas and just make them more beautiful, more functional, and make the environment better. And that's when you're painting on walls, like, that's all you're doing, essentially, wanting to just make something look a bit nicer and reflect back on the scenario that it's in.
And I think for me that was it, that it was really important to be able to reflect on the context of my work, and working with artists, and particularly people like you and Anthony has been really awesome, because you've helped me throw away some of the learned bad behaviour as a scientist of thinking about this is how you tell a story. Well, actually, I want to tell a story about my science to everyone, and that means fellow scientists, but it also means beyond that. And understanding how to build a narrative is as important for a scientific paper as it is for writing a piece of fiction. So I think working with you, with Anthony, and with Ryan Taylor, a musician that I've worked closely with as well, that's really helped me work out a new way of telling stories, and really increase the impact of my science. But it was also kind of recognising that science doesn't exist in the isolation of people, and people have very emotional and rightly emotional connections, responses to science. So it's pointless me as a 40-something-year-old professor standing pontificating, telling people about my science and why they should believe what I'm saying, without recognising that people have an emotional response to it, and recognising that and being able to work with emotions, understand emotions, including my own, in response to the things that we're discovering, I think was really important in terms of sharing and making accessible the work that we're doing.
I think that's really interesting. I think like emotional response is something that people talk a lot about with art as well, and accessibility. Because it is like emotional response is so much about what we do as artists, and it's like it comes from within, but it's also like the point of art, I suppose, is to create an emotional response in the audience. But I think accessibility-wise, a lot of people, if they're not moved by it or they don't understand it, then they feel quite excluded, and the same with science. And so it's like, and then I guess like the institutes create walls around themselves to protect themselves from that, because if people aren't emotionally responding to your work, then it's easier to not know that, I suppose.
But then
than to make it more accessible, which is what you should be doing. Yeah.
We have PR disasters then by not recognising that how we do research and what we find out will kind of evoke an emotional response. I know I did some work with an artist around genetic modification of food, which is a really difficult and divisive topic. But it was really interesting by working with him and creating artworks that spoke to those emotional responses. It helped me understand them a lot more, and it was quite powerful. And I think again the work that we've done and that you've done, it really speaks to people's emotions by constraining people inside that little house. The kind of feedback to lockdown and connecting people and their emotional responses with food within their own home was, that felt really, really powerful to me.
That's good.
So, I think we've got a few more minutes, but I guess I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what do you reckon you enjoyed the most about it?
Oh man, working together. I really love working with other people, and working with you has just been a pleasure, really. I'm like, it's just so great to get another perspective on my work, to to learn about your research, and to really feel welcomed into that research and part of a process that I found pretty important, and to make a piece of work that I feel is important and is saying something to people like ourselves, and hopefully invoking some sort of reaction and making people understand a little bit about what we can do and how we react, and maybe to buy less blueberries or just to eat them. I don't know.
I feel the same. You know, I really enjoyed the collaboration. It was, you know, we've become really good friends in the process, and I really value that friendship, and I really value being allowed to have creative views, and you know, it follows on from other pieces of work that I've done. But again, here I really felt that you let me in, and we got all excited. I remember sitting in your studio drinking cups of teas, and you were sketching little things, saying, "Oh, you mean like this?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, that's exactly what I mean." And that was really liberating for me as a scientist, because I don't normally get to do that kind of stuff. And you know, I find it frustrating because I don't have the skill set to take what's in my head onto page. But when we worked together, you were scribbling and doing these fantastic drawings, and I was seeing exactly what was in my mind on the paper, and that felt really, really kind of gratifying and important, actually, for me. And I think I'm really excited by Common Ground. I hope you'll come and see it, and it'd be really interesting to know and understand how people are going to respond to the piece of work. And you know, I think it does say something quite important about a relationship with food, the fragility of it, and how easily that can change.
Yeah, and you know, the fragility of our entire sort of system. You know, the bigger picture of it, isn't it? It's like, it doesn't just relate to food, it relates to everything that we hold close to us, I suppose. So.
Absolutely, and you know, food security is only going to become more of a prescient issue as the population rises. But you know, by working together as scientists, artists, social scientists, you know, we can build solutions and understand how acceptable or not those solutions are, and build them with the communities that need them, including ourselves. And you know, I think that's really the optimistic side of this is really important to me, that we can explore the solutions to some of these global problems. Now we're scared of these global problems. Climate change is scary, the rising population is scary, but you know, this is all soluble with kind of political and cultural will. We can fix this.
Exactly.
And I think
I think we need to just understand that it's as much our problem as everyone else's, and that
And I think that, you know, I don't think we could end on a better point. Yeah. So we've obviously been asked to leave a bit of time for people to ask us some questions. But just before we go, Joe and I would like to say some thank yous and really to our dear friend Professor Vanessa and the whole Festival of the Mind team, who've done a huge amount of work behind the scenes to make all of this happen. So thank you so much. And also to Al Dor from Sydney and Matilda and his team for his support and just being awesome, helping us put this together. We should also acknowledge the University of Sheffield and the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, who have very kindly provided the funding to allow us to do this amazing piece of work together. So I hope you found that interesting, and looking forward to answering some questions.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions come through already. Question 1, how has working together changed your perspectives and ways of working in our respective fields?
Do you want me to say something about that first? Yeah. I think for me, understanding how to tell a complicated story in a way that's accessible has been a real output of working with you, Joe. And you know, especially when you've got to tell a story in a sculptural form, and it's a really complicated story, and you want people to be able to take their own messages from it, but for there to be a cohesive story there. And the thought processes we went through to create that have really helped me reflect on my own research practice. And I write very differently now, thanks to the work I've done with you, with Anthony, with Ryan, musicians, sculptors, painters. You all kind of work on telling a story in a different way, and I've been able to absorb that and reflect that in my work. And tangibly, it's seen my work published in much more impactful journals, but then get picked up by the media, and the wider impact of my research has been really obvious. So it's really transformed how I work.
And I guess, like, for me, it's similar in that it's like what's to come after this is going to be really interesting. And so it's like what was interesting in the work that I did with Nigel at Festival of the Mind turned into this living wall that we've made, which is a permanent sculpture in Sheffield. And then, from this, we're hoping to do more projects based on the same sort of thing. And so it's like really, just changed how I look at an art project, I suppose, and just bring more research into that, try and make it accessible. Question 2. I think this is for you, Duncan. What is the one thing that we could all do to make food production more sustainable?
Stop wasting it. And I guess that's one of the reasons that we chose the metaphor of the blueberries. The biggest thing we could do to reduce the environmental footprint of food is to not waste the food that we buy. We can waste up to a third of all food that is produced is never eaten, and the figure might even be higher than that if we look at it, and that's really quite appalling.
Yeah.
That at least a third of the food that we produce is never eaten, so don't waste as much. But I think the other thing is, don't look for magic bullets. There is no silver bullet. There are bits of organic agriculture that are brilliant. There are bits of traditional agriculture that are brilliant. There are bits of historical agriculture that are brilliant, and there are new technologies that we need. To solve it, we're going to have to come together and use a kind of a mixture of methods to solve the problem. So I guess there is, we have to embrace technology, but not forget about the past in producing food, but we really need to stop wasting it.
And question 3, it's similar. You spoke about solutions. What are they? I guess it's more sort of.
So I think we need to move away from our, bucolic image of the British countryside of ploughed, neat fields full of food, because actually those processes are really damaging to the environment. We had a thing called the Green Revolution from the 1930s, where we got lots of new technology, new agricultural chemistries, new fertilizers, and it was phenomenal. It fed the world after the Second World War, and it was really important. But we're now recognizing that really intensive form of agriculture is not sustainable, because it's really using too much of our global resources, too much energy, releasing too much CO2. But at the same time, there are going to be 10 billion people to feed. So abandoning technological food production is not an option. So I think we need to think about alternative ways of producing food, and one of those really is urban agriculture. The urban environment is a really rich environment to produce food in. We've got lots of flat roofs, lots of space. If you grow food in the urban environment, it can be consumed in the urban environment. But to do that, we need new technologies. Plug for the Institute for Sustainable Food. That's one of the reasons we exist, is to build those technologies and co-create them with people that need them and are going to use them, and understand how consumers that will be eating food produced in that way will respond to those new technologies, and empower them to have a say about how those technologies are developed. And
question 4 is, do you think community gardens and more growing your own in general are part of the solution to food insecurity and unsustainability? And I think, being as we've worked together for so long now, I can answer that one. Yes. Yeah, I think like that's the whole point is that it's not about one solution. It's about like parts of lots of solutions. And so I've got community gardens, grow your own, just making food more sustainable. Like every small plot of land that can be turned into food, or even into into grass from concrete that's soaking up water from flood, all of these things, any amount of extra little bit of agriculture or community garden is going to be a good thing.
Couldn't have said it better.
You probably could.
Yeah, really good.
Do we have any more questions? I think no. I think we're good for questions. That's the
Brilliant.
Okay.
Well, I hope that was interesting. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Well, I always enjoy having a chat. And it did feel like having a chat in the pub garden in Australia when we first started thinking about this project. So thank you so much for joining us. As we say, the exhibition is now open at Sydney Matilda until a week tomorrow, I think.
I think it is, yeah. It's 10 till 4, Monday to Saturday, 11 till 4 on Sunday. And it's obviously only 6 people are allowed in at a time, but there's plenty of space to queue outside. So if there's more than 6, but there'll be plenty of room in there to go and have a look. And there's 2 other really cool artworks in there as well, so it's worth the trip down.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.